One of the most profound characters in our history in regards to breakthrough science technology who's been suppressed, Nicola Tesla comes to mind. Why did the FBI investigate him? What was the technology? Where did he learn it from? Was he just a master scientist? Well, new speculation comes forward in regards to the FBI files. Was Nicola Tesla an alien? In the declassified files from the FBI, it shows and proves that he was being investigated. Why and what were they trying to find out? It's interesting to note that there was a group of followers who believed in the UFO phenomenon. The leader, George Van Tassel, created a group in the 50s where they would all meet up in California at a location known as Big Rock.
Giant Rock, for the last 10 years, has been the Plymouth Rock of the saucer age. Saucer conventions were meeting here as far back as the pre-astronaut era of black and white television. But the contactee's storyline was the same, then as now.
Howard, would you tell us in your own words about your trip to Venus, how it started?
Well, as I say, it started first with a very decided tingling all over my body. The tingling finally extended to the mind area, and there was a clarification of mind, such as, it's hard to believe. I seem to become one with the entire universe.
Some of them have even been to our home.
Way before some of the big namers like Dr. Greer in regards to CE5, well, back in the day in the 50s, George Van Tassel was one of the first to proclaim telepathic communication with extraterrestrials not of this earth.
We're riding on an electrostatic magnetic ship right now on the Earth, doing 66,000 miles an hour right now in an orbit around the sun, and we're all astronauts in that respect.
Have you ever gone up close enough to touch one to see what was inside?
Bill, in August the 24th of 1953, I went aboard one for about 20 minutes.
It's interesting to note that the FBI has received and obtained documents from Van Tassel in regards to the possibility that Nikola Tesla is not of this earth in regards to the paperwork received by the FBI from Van Tassel's newsletter. It reads, in the 1950s, and since the time that Tesla's engineers have been contacted with spaceships. The space people have visited Tesla engineers many times and have told us that Tesla was a Venusian brought to this planet as a baby in 1856 and left with Mr. and Mrs. Tesla in the remote mountain province, which is now known as Venezuela. The possibilities, if Nikola Tesla was not of this earth, might explain some of the reasons behind his mastermind in creating some of the technology that man has never witnessed before.
Anytime Tesla's name, Nikola Tesla, is mentioned anywhere, people get excited. Even to this day, decades after he's passed away, we're still getting information about who this person was and where he came from, his inventions, his trials and tribulations, and his accolades. And well, we see part of that here in these files that are now released and have his name included in them. But what I find interesting, and many of us know this already, it's mentioned in these files who owned them, who took them after he passed away, and had him in safety deposit boxes. He had documents and all this information on things he was working on. Apparently there, I think, were 8 suitcases full of his stuff, which were eventually put on display for the government. And one of the people who were involved with this display was John Trump. He owned a hotel. I think he owned the hotel where Tesla lived for the last several years of his life. I'm not sure, I can't remember, but I think that's why he was involved, because he had access to things that not other people did. I find it very interesting that Trump's name is involved in this. So I wonder what the tie-ins there go to. Does he have anything of Tesla's? Was this stuff split up? Did people take important documents home or whatever, things of his inventions? He was a very quiet man, stayed to himself, Tesla did, and apparently some people thought he was creating a death ray and was going to give the secrets of our government to Germany or something like that. But that's why these files are here, kind of showing what direction they were going in when they came across his belongings after he passed away.
The Interplanetary Session newsletter, a newsletter owned and operated by George Van Tassel, a self-described contactee and a person that was said to be from Venus. Now, also, he was the owner and operator of the Giant Rock Spaceport in Landers, California. Next to Giant Rock, which is literally a 7-story natural rock formation, is the Integratron, a building that sadly was not finished upon George Van Tassel's death in 1978, but was close enough as far as looking finished where people to this day can go and marvel at its dome-shaped beauty. Now, in the Integratron, 2 things were supposed to have happened. One was the ability to have rejuvenating anti-aging effects. The other, having the ability to create artificial gravity waves, hence anti-gravity technology. Now, the idea for anti-gravity was said to have come from none other than Nikola Tesla. Sadly, when Nikola Tesla died in 1943, the FBI came and seized all of his personal effects and documents, most of which have never come to light. What is it that the FBI does not want us to know to this day? Was it the fact that Nikola Tesla was a radical scientist that was talking about free energy? Was it the fact that Nikola Tesla was talking about the death ray, or that was labeled the death ray, or the ability to create gravity waves? Or was it because Nikola Tesla was an open believer of extraterrestrials, space people, which he personally said to have had a contact experience in 1899? While tracking thunderstorms in Colorado Springs, he received a transmission from an unknown source, which came in the form of 3 beeps in sequence. Nikola Tesla realized that they were mathematical in nature and then started to ponder if the transmission had come from people living on Mars. As a matter of fact, people can listen to Nikola Tesla's voice describing that experience where he thought later in his life that he may very well have been the first person to make contact. Now, the question is what does George Van Tassel and Nikola Tesla have to do, considering that the majority of these documents have to do with Nikola Tesla? Is it because they were related? Or, as a lot of people say, that they were receiving contacts and messages from extraterrestrials? Some people even go as far as to say that Nikola Tesla himself was an extraterrestrial, and possibly George Van Tassel was, which, like I said earlier, he is a self-described Venusian.
What I find interesting about Nikola Tesla was right before his death, there was speculation that he was trying to create a particle beam weapon, a death ray, you could say. It's rather fascinating to find out that the government was highly interested in this, as you might expect. What's interesting is the president, Donald Trump, his uncle, John J. Trump, was actually very interested in Tesla's work. He was so interested that he actually broke down the papers and was kind of bringing in kind of the information from Tesla. He kind of dismissed it, that Tesla's technology didn't quite add up. He was almost trying to put him off like maybe he was just kind of a circus act. But in the meanwhile, I think Trump was actually thinking that this was a high asset, and he was looking forward to implementing this somehow into our national defense. Immediately after Tesla's death, the government was trying to implement Tesla's technology in particle weapon systems. And then again, Ronald Reagan in the 1980s was kind of fascinated with the death ray concept. This is where Star Wars came in, the Star Wars program, and it still kind of was being implemented and not quite put into the public. I think this is still done behind the scenes, and we do have a Star Wars program that's kind of hidden in the deep shadows of the government, just in case there's a possibility of a nuclear attack. Imagine the possibilities if Nikola Tesla's technology was implemented throughout the days of today's present day.
Frank Kritzer. Not a name that you're familiar with? Me neither, but it is synonymous with George Van Tassel. Frank Kritzer built a home underneath giant rock. It's an actual place, 7-story boulder that he built a home underneath the rock to get away from it all. He put an antenna on top of the rock, and he was a radio enthusiast. But somewhere down the road, some 12, 13 years later, he was confronted by police and locals there. He came out wielding a shotgun one time at these people, and not at the police, at citizens, but brought the police there. And he died, they think, accidentally by his own dynamite going off underground in his home when the police came over. Sad. But years later, George Van Tassel took over the home of Frank Kritzer and lived there. But not only did he live there, he created the very first, and I have to say it because it's true, the very first CE5 event. Of course, they didn't call it that. It was some sort of pilgrimage that people made every year to Giant Rock. And 11,000 people a year would go there and try to contact aliens. And George Van Tassel built a restaurant. He made it an event once a year, and they would try to contact aliens by meditating and singing and coming together, holding hands, and just trying to make contact. It was a very spiritual place, according to the Native Americans that actually lived in that area for many, many years, and talked of star people and lights in the sky and just things that you would expect that come along with alien visitations.
This is an amazing document. It basically goes into detail of all these documents of how the FBI, even J. Edgar Hoover, were keeping tabs on Nikola Tesla, as well as the U.S. military. They were worried about his death ray, as they called it, which was wireless energy, wireless electricity. And in a way, it kind of sounds like solar electricity, like solar panels. That may have been misconstrued because they didn't understand the full capacity of what he was saying. So that's why there was a battle over these documents. And one of the documents in there talks about Van Tassel, the man that runs the Giant Rock Spaceport. And they were keeping tabs on him as well because they had it was like a newspaper that they put out a little magazine on UFOs and aliens, and they believed that Tesla was brought here from Venus, that he was a Venetian, and he was left on the doorsteps of the Tesla couple, and then he was raised, and then he moved to America, where he gained his citizenship and his patents, and helped the government with some things. Well, they ended up helping him out after he died. Well, come to find, many of these trunks that they weren't aware of were being stored in warehouses and in hotels and in safe deposit boxes, all this stuff. He just left things everywhere. And it became kind of like the Indiana Jones movie, The Battle for the Ark, that they were battling for all of his science. There was one thing in there that really intrigued me. It was a protective shield that would literally be like a bubble over the United States, and it would have a range of 250 miles out, so that if any plane flew through these fields or these beams, it would explode any ordnance that they'd have on board and destroy the plane in the air. And he talked about something else that was it was beyond our physics, and he said that this would be done with plants that could create beams. Now, this is where I thought it was a little catchy in sci-fi, but then again, Tesla did some amazing things in our world. This is an amazing document, legit, and I just feel honored that I got to examine it.
So let's set the stage here. It's 1943 and war is ravaging the planet, and one of the world's greatest scientific and innovative minds passes away. So what happens to his body of work? Well, these unclassified documents from the Interplanetary Session newsletter circa 1957 essentially encompass the process, the investigation, and the inquiry of such a question. As we first get into these documents, we see the mention of a machine called the Tesla set. And this was invented in 1938 and then put into service in 1950 by those who had his schematics. This device was reported to be able to contact extraterrestrials and actually have conversations. Now, it may have been through this device that we find an exclamation about the origin of Tesla, which is only in a small paragraph in the beginning and doesn't necessarily follow up throughout the documentation, but is still very much interesting to note. This actually expressed that Tesla might have been from Venus and was brought here as a baby in 1856 and given to his parents. Again, very fascinating claim, and it's something, again, to research a bit further. Now, in the way of where Tesla's technology might have ended up, we need to keep in mind that the military had a very legitimate interest in his work. Apparently, Tesla was working on an advanced torpedo of sort, and of course, we're all familiar with the classic death ray machine, which essentially was a device that could, in one way, shape, or form, shoot a plane out of the sky at 250 miles away. Now, this was very important and significant back then because the military believed this might be the only safeguard we had against an atomic attack. Now, going through these documents and meticulously poring over them, you're going to find many different names. One of these names of extreme interest is Blois Fitzgerald, who was apparently a protege of Tesla, at least in the later years of his life. Now, this person in character comes across with good intentions throughout the documentation, appearing to want to secure this technology and writings from Tesla so that it may be put into the correct hands. Obviously, being at war, there was concern that it would fall into the wrong hands. That being said, and speaking about falling into the wrong hands, there are three names that are mentioned in way of initially taking whatever material was existing in Tesla's room just after his death. Those three people, one of which is a nephew of Tesla, is Sava Kozanovich, George Clark, and Kenneth Swayze. That being said, these three individuals accessed the safe that was in his hotel room under the guidance of three managers of the hotel, under the auspice that they were there looking for legitimate certification in respect to Tesla's death. That being said, they very quickly pilfered that safe and took anything pertinent to his work and documentations to his technology. So, looking through these documents as a whole, it's very interesting. There's a lot here to look into. But again, this really gives us a bit more than a skeletal understanding of what might have become of this technology. It's my belief that, let's put it this way. Tesla did mention that he had his work spread throughout many different locations, 80 to be precise, that held trunks which then held his technology in one form or another. They also mentioned in the documentation that it's possible that a good bulk of his work was held in a New York City warehouse for quite some time, and they were waiting for somebody to come and claim this technology and then investigate further, but nobody did. That being said, it's my belief that I have to say that his technology is more than likely still out there and more than likely being used in different ways behind the scenes that we're just not familiar with and perhaps see it in our everyday life.
For 20 years, it was a place that people made the pilgrimage there to try to contact aliens. There's all these pictures in there that it's really cool to see. Old, legitimate-looking UFO photographs that are photographs of inside George Tesla's home, which was Frank Kritzer's, but it's pretty amazing that this was the very first CE5 event, and they did it there for 20 years. They show all sorts of pictures. Life magazine went down there, but the rock wound up splitting in half because they assume it was all the fires that were lit. It eventually cracked the rock and showed its core its granite core, which was all white. Even today, it's still there, but it's got graffiti on it. They called it a integratin. There were plans to turn it into a disco, but instead now, the owners turned it into an offbeat tourist attraction offering sound baths to calm your soul. Long live George Van Tassel, the original CE5 master.
What was it like? What happened?
Well, the interior walls were what looked like mother of pearl plastic, like we put on toilet seats and for decoration. The light inside seemed to come from everywhere. The instrument panel wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before in all of my years since 1927 in the air game. And they had a compartment in the wall which both cleans and deodorizes their clothes by some light process, which required no water, soap, or detergents, or a washing machine.
It's also interesting to note some of the language in regards to when UFOs, flying saucers, might make their presence known to the planet. Well, it starts with the first phase and then a second phase, but what I find really interesting is actually the third phase. It's a full-scale operations across America where flying saucers will reveal themselves at a moment in time. Ironically, when we made up the name of Third Phase of Moon, we had no idea about these statements in this newsletter, but now it seems prophetic that there is a statement in the FBI files via this newsletter of a third phase event in regards to disclosure. I think Third Phase of Moon is the place where you will see disclosure at some point in time in history.